Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session. On behalf of NCDOT and ITRI, we are so grateful for today's amazing turnout. My name is Amna Cameron, and I serve as NCDOT's Deputy Director of Strategic Initiatives and Program Support. I'd like to introduce today's speaker. Dr. Daniel Finley is with NC State's Institute of Transportation Research and Education. He serves as the Associate Director of Education and Training. This webinar presents the third edition of the Public Perception Survey on Transportation Revenues. NCDOT conducts this biennial survey to track over time how citizens feel about our transportation network, how much you pay to support that network, and to test perceptions of new revenue models like a mileage-based user fee. This year, we expanded the survey to gain better understanding about electric vehicles, focusing on those who indicate that they would most unlikely not buy one. A recorded version of this webinar will be available along with the final report, which is located for you to download from the dashboard. Throughout the webinar, feel free to drop questions in the chat box. After Daniel finishes his presentation, we will take questions and respond upon the conclusion. So Dr. Finley, thank you so much for joining us, and I turn it over to you to introduce your research team and begin the program.
Thank you, Amna. I appreciate that kind introduction and looking forward to this presentation as well. I would like to thank NCDOT and primarily Amna Cameron and Bert DeSico for their engagement and support of our project, and the NCDOT Research Unit for sponsoring this effort. I'm going to go and turn my webcam off so you have the full screen for the presentation. And this was conducted under NCDOT Research Project 2022-30. And I'm going to cover a lot of details in this presentation, and there are even more in the report. So I do encourage you, if you have an interest in this topic, feel free to dig into the report and follow up with us if you have any questions. The link is on the last slide of the presentation, as well as Amna mentioned, she did upload it as a handout to this presentation that you can download. We're going to report the results of survey and focus group responses, and these don't necessarily represent the opinions of the research team and NCDOT, nor does it mean the responses are factually accurate. They represent the respondents' opinions and perceptions based on the questions that were provided to them. In addition to myself, our research team primarily included Emmeline McCaleb, Joy Davis, and Michael Cobb. So thank you to them also for their important work on this project. So as an overview of where the data came from, where these perceptions were collected, we performed both a survey and a focus group. The survey was in August with over 1,700 respondents from across the state, and it did update previous versions to focus on the perceptions of electric vehicles and clarify and refine the survey throughout. Our focus groups were collected just prior to the survey in July, 12 focus groups with a total of 110 participants. I'm going to start with a few questions on transportation funding and tax alternatives. And this is a question that we've included in all three iterations of the study. So you see a pie chart here from 2019, 2020, and 2022. So the focus of this study was our 2022 results, but we will tie back to some of these previous results where the questions were consistent. So we asked survey respondents whether the state should increase spending on roads, keep the spending the current amount, or decrease spending. And overall, most respondents, 92%, indicated that funding should be increased or maintained, and that's consistent with previous surveys. They were also asked if they felt strongly or not strongly about their preference. Respondents who thought spending should be increased felt more strongly than those who thought spending should be maintained or decreased, where 81% of those who said increase said they felt that way strongly, compared to those who said they think spending should be decreased. Only 63% of those felt strongly in that way. 54% of respondents in metropolitan areas indicated spending should be increased, versus a very similar number, but 50% in non-metropolitan areas. And perspectives were on spending were similar across self-identified political ideologies. In terms of increasing, those who identified as liberal said 52%, moderate 51%, and conservative 54%. So very close in those political ideologies. Older respondents were more likely to support a spending increase. That was 57% for those who were 65 and older, and 48% in the lowest age category, 18 to 24. Compared to the last survey, more respondents thought spending should be increased. We see that change from people who thought it should be maintained, switching over to that increase perspective. We asked respondents about an average North Carolina vehicle owner who we said would drive 12,000 miles in 1 year. This driver would pay approximately $200 per year in state gas tax, or approximately $15 per month. We wanted to know whether these amounts were fair, expensive, or inexpensive. We asked this in a split ballot format, meaning that about half the respondents saw the annual figure of $200 per year, and the other half saw the monthly figure of $15 per month. We did ask a few of these split ballot type questions on the survey, and the purpose was to see if there was an impact from the way the question was asked or what information was provided. Respondents were asked if they thought, again, this North Carolina driver driving 12,000 miles pays that gas tax, whether it's expensive, fair, or inexpensive. Across both ballots, 77% of respondents indicated that the cost was either fair or inexpensive. Between the two ballots, respondents who received the annual ballot were only slightly more likely to think the cost was expensive, but we can see that difference. And again, the way the information is framed may affect the response. And respondents who received the monthly ballot were more likely to think that the cost was inexpensive. Non-metropolitan residents were more likely to think the cost was expensive. 76% of fair or inexpensive in metropolitan areas, and 68% in non-metropolitan with the annual cost. For the monthly cost, it was 77% fair or inexpensive in metropolitan areas and 75% in non-metropolitan areas. So the residents in non-metropolitan areas may be more perceptive to the monthly breakdown compared to that annual breakdown. Looking at the previous survey from 2020, 56% of respondents who received the annual cost ballot thought the gas tax was fair, 11% thought it was inexpensive, and 31% thought it was expensive. 63% of respondents who received the monthly ballot thought it was fair, 18% thought it was inexpensive, and 19% thought it was expensive. So overall, in 2022, our latest survey, more people across both ballots, but particularly the monthly ballot, thought the gas tax was inexpensive. We asked participants if they had to choose just one, which of four options should the state rely on to fund repairs to the state's road network. And this is another example of a split ballot, and we see at the bottom of the slide here, we have the different categories and the different ballots. So there's a ballot A, B, and C. And across those ballots, there were these four options. So the first one is a new fee on miles driven. And this is known, if you're familiar with this topic area, it does have a lot of names. It's also known as mileage-based user fee, road user charge, vehicle miles traveled fee. We try to just make this generic in the instances we could. There's also the option for a gas tax increase, a sales tax increase, or a vehicle registration fee increase. So all these are framed as adding the new fee or the three, which would just be an increase of existing fees. So in ballot A, we just generally said each of these could be added or increased. Ballot B and C, though, get specific. So in ballot B, we then put some numbers with each of these options. So we say the new fee on vehicle miles driven would be 0.5 cent, would be 9-cent increase on the gas tax, 0.5 cent increase on the sales tax, or a $60 increase on vehicle registration fees. Again, these are all hypothetical, meant to be relatively revenue neutral, meaning that all of these would generate roughly the same amount of revenue. But again, they are hypothetical. And then ballot C just basically doubles the values in ballot B to see if there's any effect there. There is a diversity of preferences for transportation funding source, and these presented options impact the preferences, and particularly the specific details of those options can impact the preferences. So in these survey results, the respondents were asked which funding source the state should rely on to fund the repairs to the state's road network again. The plurality of respondents preferred the sales tax increase in all but one ballot, and that was in ballot B, where they preferred the new half-of-1 cent fee on miles driven. The vehicle registration fee increase was just added in this most recent survey and was popular in the general ballot, but the support declined sharply once numbers were added. We can see that blue bar on the far right with the vehicle registration fee, again, is high under that general, where we're just saying it's a general increase in the vehicle registration fee. But once you put the number, and again, those are the largest nominal numbers, $60 and $120, but it would be a one-time fee compared to the others that are based on miles or gas consumed or sales tax. So again, we do see that the way we word these has a big impact on the respondents' results. We also have good results from the focus group on this particular problem or question. Nearly half of the focus group participants thought a new fee on vehicle miles driven was the best tax alternative. In particular, participants in rural areas favored the new fee on miles driven over those in urban and suburban areas. Participants who indicated they were Republican or conservative favored the miles driven fee at 71% over that of Democrats and independents, which were at 40% and 46% respectively. The next most popular option was an increase in the annual vehicle registration fee, which was 30%, and the third most popular was the sales tax increase at 13%. The least popular was an increased tax on gas. When further probed, over half of the participants said that people who drive more miles on roads should pay more money to support the state's transportation system. Participants who agreed said that was fair and equitable. Participants who did not agree were concerned about how mileage would be monitored or tracked, and noted that they thought it would penalize people living in rural areas. When further probed regarding the gas tax, about half of the respondents agreed that people who use more gas should pay more money to support the state's transportation system. Participants thought that this would require tourists to pay into the state infrastructure, would incentivize fuel efficiency, and would convince more people to drive electric vehicles. Participants who disagreed said that gas mileage does not equate to wear and tear on the road and would put farmers at a disadvantage. When further probed regarding the vehicle registration fees, most respondents did not think that people who drive more expensive vehicles should have to pay more money to support the state's transportation system, and only about 18% of participants agreed. The participants who disagreed said that this may deter people from buying more expensive, fuel-efficient, or electric vehicles. When asked if they thought it was fair that electric vehicle drivers pay an annual fee of $140, over half of the participants did not think it was fair. The participants who agreed said that this was fair because they were not paying into the system through the gas tax and needed to contribute to road maintenance in some way. But the participants who disagreed thought $140 was too expensive and might discourage residents from buying electric vehicles. Now, moving into this category with electric vehicles, and as Amna mentioned, we did expand and really focus in on electric vehicles in this survey in particular, beyond the funding questions. And so overall in this survey, 65% of respondents who did not drive an electric vehicle indicated that they would consider it as their next vehicle. And almost 9 in 10 respondents already that had an electric vehicle in their household said they would seriously consider buying another electric vehicle. 55% of focus group participants had either been a driver or passenger in an electric vehicle, and 73% of respondents reporting having read some or a lot about electric vehicles. Now, pulling that apart a little bit, the detailed knowledge was relatively low about electric vehicles in North Carolina. Just over 1 in 5 said they had read or heard a lot about electric vehicles, which is about the same percentage as those who said they read or heard only a little. Male respondents and those with higher household incomes reported hearing or reading more about electric vehicles. And respondents reported hearing or reading more about electric vehicles were more likely to say they would buy an electric vehicle and were more supportive of increasing electric vehicle productions and sales. However, this doesn't necessarily mean that learning about electric vehicles results in increased willingness to buy an electric vehicle. Research suggests possible causal relationships between knowledge and preferences are reciprocal. People more willing to buy an electric vehicle for other reasons then become more likely to read more about them. And not that hearing more about electric vehicles independent of those reasons for learning more about an electric vehicle increases the willingness to buy one. Urban residents were more likely to say they would consider buying an electric vehicle. Geography, though, made little difference to self-identified Democrats, but living in non-urban area reduced the willingness to consider buying an electric vehicle among self-identified independents from 58% to 38%, and from self-identified Republicans from 37% to 23%. A plurality, 48%, said the average range for an electric vehicle was between 200 and 400 miles, which is the most accurate answer option, and respondent characteristics were unrelated to their estimates of the electric vehicle range, and estimates are only weakly related to their willingness to consider purchasing an electric vehicle. However, a majority of respondents who said that the range of an electric vehicle was very important to them personally would consider buying an electric vehicle, and they are more likely to consider buying an electric vehicle compared to residents who rated the range of an electric vehicle as less important. The focus group participants who had driven or ridden in an electric vehicle before perceived electric vehicles perceived them as quiet, fast, smooth, and fun. However, participants who did not have personal experience in an electric vehicle also perceived them as being quiet, but some thought they were slower, uncomfortable, and would lack the range they needed. Participants who did not regularly drive an electric vehicle cited initial purchase price and charging availability as barriers. 67% of focus group participants would buy or lease an electric vehicle if it were about the same price as a gas-powered vehicle. 68% would buy or lease an electric vehicle if it were just as safe as a gas-powered vehicle. And overall, about a quarter of participants would not be interested in an electric vehicle no matter what, even with a few variations of potential scenarios to see their impact. We said, what if electric vehicles save over $1,600 annually compared to gas-powered vehicle drivers? The chances of being injured in an electric vehicle are lower than in a gas-powered vehicle, and if they could purchase or lease an electric vehicle that could be used as a generator. So if they said no to that initial prompt about an electric vehicle and a gas-powered vehicle being the same price, we did prompt them further. So electric vehicle owners saying that they would save over $1,600 annually, 72% continued to say no. When we mentioned the potential safety benefits, 83% continued to say no. And the use of a generator, 85% continued to say no. So overall, only about 5% of participants who were initially interested in an EV could be convinced to change their responses with these items. We asked participants if they would support or oppose a goal that new passenger vehicles sold in North Carolina run on electric power by 2030. This, again, was a split ballot question to ask about the goals for increasing the production of electric vehicles. One was specific and provided a goal that at least 50% of all new passenger vehicles would be electric. The other one was general and said that the goal was to broadly just increase the amount of new passenger vehicles that were powered by electricity. Respondents were more likely to support than oppose increasing the percentage of electric vehicles on the road. Support for the electric vehicle goals were higher, though, when no specific percent or year is specified. Respondents were very likely to support a general goal of increasing the percentage of electric vehicles at 66%, and adding additional context to specify that goal of at least 50% of all new passenger vehicles sold in the state should run on electric power by 2030, reduced the support to 54%, rather than just referring to that general increase in the future. Male respondents, Republicans, older respondents, and those who could not charge an electric vehicle where they lived were more opposed to increasing the production of electric vehicles. Democrats, electric vehicle drivers, and respondents who had read or heard more about electric vehicles were more supportive of the goal. Both respondents who supported and opposed the goal felt strongly about their opinion, regardless of whether they received that general or specific ballot. We have a couple of examples of cross-tabulation tables provided here. This one is looking at the age ranges, and these crosstabs show more details, which you can review in more detail in the NCDOT final report. If you've opened that up, you've seen that it's over 400 pages, so a lot of content there, a lot of information that you can go through and look and see how the different demographic characteristics or other cross-tabulations relate to the answer choices. So what we're looking at here with the ages, this is, again, at the top, the specific ballot that looks at 50% of all new passenger vehicles should run on electric power by 2030. And then the bottom table is looking at passenger vehicles. Just generally, we want to increase the number of those that run on electric power in the future. So the 18 to 24-year-olds support is slightly higher when a specific goal is mentioned, but for every other group, it's higher when no specific goal is mentioned. And in a similar way, again, looking at how we can dig into these cross-tabulations to see more information and more details, this is looking at metropolitan and non-metropolitan respondents. And we can see that the support for the goal increases for both groups when no goal is specified, but at a higher rate for respondents in the non-metropolitan areas. Again, when it's just general, people were more supportive of that goal than when we gave them a specific percentage and a time frame. We asked participants how important each of the following factors are in their decision to buy or lease a vehicle, and this was just generally buying or leasing any vehicle. In the survey, the most important traits here are ranked in order. So this is purchase price at the top with 92% of respondents saying it was important, then cost to maintain at 90%, and rounding out the top three is the range at 89%. For the sake of simplicity here in this graph, we did condense the responses from very and somewhat important and unimportant together. But to account for the polarity of these response options, a majority said that range, cost to maintain, and cost to fuel were very important. The purchase price of a car was cited most often as being very important. About 3 in 4 respondents said that the purchase price is very important. And a minority of respondents said that vehicle model options, the impact on the environment, or the incentives to buy an electric vehicle were very important considerations. For the maintenance costs, these were more important to conservatives at 93% and moderates at 92% than liberals. For the range, it was important to respondents in both metropolitan and non-metropolitan areas, and was the least important to younger respondents. In terms of the cost to fuel or to charge, this was important to both metropolitan and non-metropolitan respondents, but more metropolitan respondents indicated it was very important. It was most important to respondents with household incomes between $50,000 and $100,000 per year, and least important to respondents with household incomes less than $25,000 and above $100,000. That cost, again, to fuel or charge was most important to older residents and respondents and least important to those younger. And conservatives were more likely to indicate that this was important than those self-identified as liberal and moderate. For the vehicle model options, it was most important to conservatives at 80% and moderates at 77%, compared to only 66% of liberals, and more important to female than male respondents. In terms of incentives, Black or African American respondents indicated the incentives were more important than white respondents. And in terms of the environmental impact, it was mentioned as being more important to metropolitan than non-metropolitan respondents, and more important to liberal and moderate respondents. The environmental impact was also least important to the youngest age group, compared to the older respondents. For the focus group participants mentioned the initial purchase price the most is what they look for in purchasing or leasing a new or used vehicle, but they also mentioned reliability, safety, and size of the vehicle. Focusing in on the environmental impact from the previous slide in question, this was one of the ones that we were somewhat surprised to see the results, especially the environmental impact, which was slightly more important in selecting a vehicle to older respondents compared to younger respondents. So again, looking at a little more detail on this same problem we saw in the previous slide. About 15% of respondents in the youngest age group responded that this was unimportant to them in selecting a new car, versus about 10% of respondents for those 65 and plus. We asked participants a series of questions comparing electric vehicles to gas-powered vehicles. And in the survey, and these survey results for our state are also consistent with recent national polling. By wide margins, between 70 and 80% of respondents thought electric vehicles were better for the environment and electric vehicles cost more to purchase. Just 10% or so thought the opposite. A majority of gas cars cost less to maintain, and a plurality said gas cars were more reliable. Just 33% of respondents who said electric vehicles were less reliable were willing to buy an electric vehicle, but more than 80% would consider buying one if they thought an electric vehicle were more reliable. Those identified as Democrats are significantly more likely to say electric vehicles are more reliable and better for the environment, whereas those identified as Republicans are significantly more likely to say an electric vehicle costs more to maintain. Age has a similar but weaker pattern to these findings, with younger respondents responding more like self-identified Democrats, and other demographics do not seem to vary much with these responses. Respondents indicated that they thought electric vehicles were more expensive to purchase and were more environmentally friendly. And one of the things to think about with this is where there may be more information or more detailed information may be needed, where's there a mismatch, and potentially on the maintenance cost and reliability, there needs to be more information available to or researched by those interested in this topic. For the focus groups, we heard that electric vehicles are perceived as more expensive to buy. The environmental benefits were mentioned by some of those focus group participants, and the perceptions of the maintenance costs were split. Some thought they would be higher, some thought they would be lower for an electric vehicle. This is an important one for many people as they're talking about electric vehicles, and we asked participants how convenient it is to charge an electric vehicle where they currently live, at nearby public spaces, at nearby retail establishments, on long car trips, and where they currently work. This graph is only for the non-electric vehicle owners. So we pulled them out from the EV owners, which had very different responses, because this table was more interesting looking at those non-EV owners. So keep that in mind as we're looking at these data and you're looking at these responses. It does not include those who own electric vehicles. Less than 40% of respondents indicated that charging was convenient at all 5 of the specified locations. And in all cases, the plurality of respondents indicating that charging would be inconvenient or not available. 34% of respondents indicated that charging would not be available with the place they currently worked. And between 15 and 30% said charging wasn't even possible for each location other than on long trips. Overall, 1/3 of respondents said charging was not possible for at least one of the 5 locations. Just 15% though said charging wasn't available at 3 or more locations. Living in an urban area was only weakly related to being able to charge an EV across all 5 locations. Respondents with an electric vehicle in their household, though, were more likely to say charging an electric vehicle was possible and convenient where they live, work, shop, and in public places. It is likely that respondents with an electric vehicle in their household purchased their electric vehicle because charging was already available at key locations. Alternatively, they could be more aware of convenient charging options because they needed to learn about them for owning one. Nevertheless, saying that charging options were possible, even though it may not have been convenient, was unrelated to purchasing intentions among respondents without an electric vehicle in their household. The actual convenience of charging an electric vehicle, if charging was thought to be available, was weakly related to purchasing intentions. It mattered most based on where respondents lived and for long trips. In the focus groups, the ability to charge and range were frequently mentioned by participants as potential obstacles for choosing an electric vehicle as their next vehicle. Summarizing some of these transportation funding topics, there is support for increasing or maintaining transportation spending. Most state residents say they prefer increased spending on roads. And importantly, respondents who support increased spending are more likely to feel strongly about their preference and to care more about transportation. Among respondents who favored increased spending, 81% say they strongly support more spending, and in contrast, just 55% of those who prefer spending to remain the same say they felt that way strongly. Likewise, 60% of respondents who said transportation was very important also supported increased spending compared to just 32% who wanted the same amount of spending. In terms of the road conditions, they were rated as fair or good. A plurality of respondents said that the roads they drive in are in fair condition. Otherwise, respondents were more than twice as likely to rate the roads as good versus bad. So 34% said good, only 15% said bad. If transportation was very important to respondents, they gave more extreme road condition ratings. They were more likely to say road conditions were both excellent and poor. Respondents' evaluations of road conditions were inconsistently and weakly correlated with their spending preferences. A majority of respondents who wanted spending to remain the same said their roads were in good condition, but respondents who wanted either more or less spending gave similar ratings about road conditions. Overall, there's a limited knowledge of the North Carolina gas tax. Respondents don't appear to know the amount of North Carolina gas tax. Most gave an incorrect answer when presented with 5 answer choices, in addition saying they were confident versus admitting to guessing the gas tax and choosing the correct or incorrect answer. Respondents' estimates of the gas tax is unrelated to their road spending preferences, road condition ratings, or even saying that transportation was important to them. Despite being incorrect about the gas tax, respondents who thought the gas tax cost more were also more likely to support a goal of increasing the production of electric vehicles, even when the goal was explicitly stated for half of all vehicles sold in the state to run on electric power by 2030. And this may be an important indicator that drivers hope to reduce their own gas tax expenses. The general state sales tax increase was preferred to fund transportation in the survey, but nearly half of focus group participants thought a new fee on miles driven was the best tax alternative. Summarizing our electric vehicle questions, 65% of respondents with plans to purchase or lease a new vehicle would consider an electric vehicle. Respondents indicated that the vehicle price, maintenance costs, and the cost of fuel or charging are the most important traits they consider in a vehicle. The purchase price, range, ability to charge mentioned frequently also in the focus groups. Participants overall had a favorable view of electric vehicles, and roughly a quarter of the focus group participants would not be interested in an electric vehicle no matter what. The availability of charging, range, and initial purchase price are notable barriers to electric vehicle interest and potential adoption in the focus groups and in the survey. Most respondents think that electric vehicle charging would be inconvenient or not possible at many locations. Thank you for your interest in this research study. I hope you will take the opportunity to read our final report that has been provided as a handout in this webinar. The link is also on the screen, as well as a QR code that will take you to the same page, and also a shortened link at the bottom. If you have to type that URL in, that shortened one may help you. At this point, we will return to our moderators and open up and start responding to the questions that we received.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I encourage everyone on the webinar to submit questions if you have them, and we will take them. Daniel, I'm going to start off with a question for the full research team. And just again to remind, we have Dr. Finley, Dr. Michael Cobb, and Emily McCaleb joining us to answer your questions. So to the research team, what were your most surprising findings?
I'll start with one because I mentioned it on the slide. I think all of us saw this, that the environmental impact on the youngest age group was a surprising one. To me, going through this, I think we had thoughts that may play out a different way. And then another thing to me that was surprising was the effect of those numbers when we provided the numbers on that split ballot for the taxes and fees, just how influential those numbers are. And that context is very important. So I think people may have struggled to compare what half of a cent or 1 cent on gas is compared to a $60 or $120 vehicle registration fee. So I think it shows the importance of how those numbers are communicated, and that's going to affect those responses. Mike, Emmeline, anything to add there?
Yes, Mike.
Yeah, thank you. I think the most interesting thing, it's hard to identify. There's a lot of interesting things in here, and I hope people take a look at the report and follow up with questions if they have any. The estimates of what an EV range looks like, so similar to the gas tax, people can look reasonably accurate at times, but whatever they think an EV range was unrelated to their purchasing intentions as a kind of factual question, but it shows up in what they express as an important dimension to their purchasing dimensions when given a list of things that they would rank. That the range of an EV is important. I think it kind of suggests that people really don't know how far they go on a gas tank, or some people have a better understanding of it. As someone who drives a very old and outdated car, I have no assistance from technology to tell me what I get out of a tank of gas. I've just figured it out, or I ignore it. I don't know. And I rented a car recently that was newer, which probably most people have, and it'll tell you exactly what your range looks like and get updated. But I'm not sure people even kind of memorize that and think about it, or know how to translate everyday activities to what an EV can and can't do. And there might be stereotypes that drive perceptions of negative range of EVs that are dictating their reactions, as opposed to a true calculation of what you can do. That would be mine.
And just briefly for me, I think one of the most surprising things that we saw in the focus groups was how many people are not interested in driving an EV no matter what, even when they're told that they're safer, even when they're told that EV drivers on average save $1,600 a year. A lot of people just didn't believe those facts, even when we gave them the source for them. So that was surprising to me.
Well, let's start with questions from our audience. First, some basics. Tell us how the survey was distributed, how respondents were selected.
Emmeline, would you like to help us with that one?
Yeah, sure. So we worked with a survey distributor called Cint, and we give them a list of what our desired demographics are, which was to reflect the population of North Carolina, and then they go out and advertise the survey online, mostly through like ads on social media, and they take the survey that way. And then with the focus groups, we worked with a different group to conduct the focus groups. So they were recruited through mail and social media, and they participated in the focus groups virtually.
And there was a small payment for focus group participants to encourage participation.
Yes.
Next,
Focus
is there
group.
a heat map of the geographic distribution of the survey respondents?
I don't think we've produced a heat map, but that's certainly something I think we could put together, especially at the county level. Is that correct, Emmeline? I don't think we have mapped the respondents.
Yes, we haven't produced one, but that we can make that available.
So we have a question that says, did you say that the VMT fee was preferred by rural folks? But let's talk a little bit in general about metropolitan versus non-metropolitan responses. But also answering that, is it true that a miles-based fee is preferred by rurals?
Emmeline's probably looking that up in a minute just to confirm the specific percentages, but one of the things I do want to point out, and a lot of the research has pointed to that is related to this question, is actually most estimates I've seen, actually I don't know that I've seen any that don't suggest that, actually they do suggest rural drivers would end up paying less under a vehicle miles traveled fee than under the current gas tax process. And that's mostly because on average, a rural driver has a less fuel efficient vehicle. And so they're actually paying more in the gas tax to drive a mile currently than their urban counterparts. And in a vehicle miles traveled fee system, they would actually pay lower on average per mile than their urban counterparts. Or that change would be a drop in that fee per mile. So that is something that is being shared. And Emmeline, do you have the specific percents on the metropolitan, non-metropolitan for the vehicle miles traveled?
Yeah, so mainly in the focus groups is where we saw the more pronounced emergence of non-metropolitan residents preferring the VMT fee, but also in the survey, we saw about 35% of non-metropolitan residents preferring the a new 1/2 cent fee on miles driven, and then in the next ballot, which was the 1 cent fee on miles driven, that did drop down to 27%, and they kind of realigned in the increase in the general state sales tax, 46% there.
Great, thanks for sharing those details.
In the focus groups, we definitely saw a more pronounced split between the urban and non-urban residents.
And we hypothesized, particularly the difference in the focus groups versus the survey, that the discussion and the kind of the back and forth and the tie between the logical use of driving a mile was probably the reason for that increase in support in the focus groups relative to the survey.
For information purposes, in North Carolina DOT participates through the Eastern Transportation Coalition to conduct mileage-based user fee pilots. As part of that work, we analyzed DMV, our DMV driver information, and have found that rural drivers in North Carolina pay an average of $17 less compared to your urban driver. This study has been repeated in 7 other states, and in all 8 states, those findings are consistent. So the next question, was the survey based solely on larger EVs, or was microtransit considered by the survey administration or the participants?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we, for the sake of simplicity and not having this survey be expanded too large, we didn't provide specific vehicle types with EVs, but they are meant to be passenger vehicles was the implication in the survey. And but again, we didn't say this was the make and model. And of course, there are ranges of the performance and characteristics and all that within electric vehicles. So that could be a future line of research to get much more specific, but people have their own experience with different EVs. And so we did keep that more broad, but again, focusing more on the passenger vehicle side and not on micromobility. for this survey.
During the focus groups, was there any discussions of congestion pricing to be part of separately or as a mileage-based fee? Because as this respondent says, reducing BMT fees for rural and targeting those less traveled locations.
Emmeline, do you recall that coming up in the focus group sessions? Your mic isn't on.
Sorry, that wasn't a topic that we had planned in the script. However, some people did bring it up. We had a section after we discussed the tax alternatives where people could just kind of brainstorm what they think would be a good alternative. And that came up as well as toll roads.
So we have one that's going to test your memory. We have a question that says, did you ask questions about opinions of the other ways people get around? Or do you ask about opinions of reducing BMT? So just for the record, this is about perceptions of how you pay revenue, but NCDOT does conduct a separate test that Dr. Finley leads survey on that, but also we covered that in the second version of the survey and in the first, but we took that out this time because it was duplicated in surveys and we wanted space to put some EV questions in. So can you talk about that other state survey and the prior public perception results?
I can generally, as you mentioned, Amna, that's probably too much testing my memory to provide any substantial details. But the study that is, I think if you search NCDOT's website, we can try to put the link in here in a minute of the the other survey you're mentioning is known as the statewide survey. So I think if you Google or search on the research unit page for NCDOT statewide survey, you'll find those. There's been a handful of those that have been conducted since around 2015 or 2016. And they do dig into a lot more detail about which modes you use, what's your primary mode, distances traveled, and then a lot of the characteristics of those individual modes. It's a very lengthy survey, but there's a lot of rich information in there. And I think that would probably be the best resource based on the question that was asked. And if there are more details that you're looking for, of course, here's my email address on the screen as well as Amna's. Feel free to reach out to us, and I'd be glad to provide you more links and more details about those studies. And again, I can link you to the previous public perceptions surveys, each of those first two that do have a little more details and information about people's other travel patterns and habits. Mike, Emmeline, anything to add there that's on the top of your head?
No, that is a memory test. I was actually trying to find the first iteration of the survey, in which I think we covered that. So I think it'd be better just to link.
The next question, were hybrid vehicles considered? Or did they come up in the focus groups?
So on the survey, we did ask about, in previous years, we asked specifically about hybrid vehicles, about any type of hybrid vehicle. And in the focus groups this year, we asked specifically about plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. And then on the survey, we also asked about them just to gauge how many respondents drove them. And in the focus groups, we also discussed plug-in hybrids versus full EVs, if people had a preference for either of those. And interest was similar between both.
Yeah, just quickly to add, so when we have subgroup analysis, we're often combining hybrid gas, electric gas, hybrid cars with the EV, because there are only, I think, less than 60 people in the survey who said that it was a pure plug-in only. And it's very difficult to do a lot with a group that small. So people that have experience with the plug-in was kind of the easier way to break apart the results. But we can always just look at those under 60 respondents as well in the main survey.
During the focus group discussions, did anything come out about out-of-state drivers? About it being fair, about how an MBUF would work?
So that was one of the main concerns that people did have about a mileage-based user fee. North Carolina residents driving out of state and how that would be accounted for, and out-of-state drivers in North Carolina and how that would be accounted for. So that was a main concern that people brought up with that. And people also had some more minor concerns about privacy and how that would be tracked.
For those of you who know me, I spend a lot of my time on a mileage-based user fee. So talk to me about the perceptions. Do you see that first North Carolinians are learning actually about what it is? And do you think their perceptions are maybe softening a little?
And this is specifically on the vehicle miles traveled, mileage-based user fee.
Road usage charge, MBUF, however you want to call it.
See, Mike, Emmeline, anything to start with there?
Yeah, I don't think exactly how it works has penetrated mass opinion yet. Some people know a little bit more about it, but they're in the minority. So a lot of what we're still doing is information experiments where you're kind of describing what it would look like so that they have a baseline, just a little bit of information. And does that sound better or worse compared to the things they know a little bit more about? I don't think there's a hardened support or opposition to it. When push comes to shove, I think since the first survey that other preferences are stronger for other forms of raising transportation revenue than mile-based, but most of that could be a lack of information. And if people were discussing it more news stories about it, and different states start implementing it, I think that could easily change what people think about it.
The next question, do you have any results that would indicate the preference for the hybrid plug-in EVs over the, I have a preference for the hybrid plug-ins over just pure EVs?
Not in the main survey. Emmeline, I don't know if this came up in focus group conversations, and I didn't mean to cut you off, Daniel. I just that was not part of a question to distinguish between the two on the main survey.
I was going to say the same thing. Emmeline, go ahead.
Yeah, so that wasn't something that we asked on the survey. However, in the focus groups, it did come up a couple times that people said that they think that they would be more comfortable with a hybrid, just because they still like having the ability to fuel up their car with gas. And they thought that having the hybrid option, it would be good for them for like just running everyday errands. And then the long distance drives that they plan on doing, they would be able to rely on gas.
Well, I will say I did get several questions on the other NCDOT study dealing with who pays what with the mileage-based user fee. So I will send out something separately on that. To the panelists, do you have any final thoughts?
I'm excited to see that the state and NCDOT in particular, and Amna and Bert, for your time investing in this topic to learn more and try to understand this, because it's important. I do believe that the gas tax was a very effective and efficient tax for 100 years with different fueling options. That's not as strong of a case anymore, and I'm just excited that there's research being done on this, and that hopefully any changes that happen are well informed and that consider what people's perceptions are across the state. So thanks for NCDOT sponsoring this work and having us engaged in this.
Emily, Dr. Cobb?
Sure. I'd add that I think it's puzzling that the convenience of charging locations is not more dominant in how people were then expressing their willingness to buy an EV. That being unable to was surprisingly not as strongly related to whether or not they would consider buying one, like at their workplace, outside of the home. It just wasn't mattering that much. Which may partially explain why things like range weren't really registering as a factual question for preferences either, that people that have already adopted it did so for reasons that people that are now haven't done so. It just isn't, they're not quite there yet. It's, it's still like another step down the road.
And I would just encourage everyone to check out the report, because there's a lot in there that we couldn't fit with our time today. And thanks for attending.
Well, thank you to the audience for joining us today. Reach out to either myself or Dr. Finley with any questions. If you would like that study on the miles-based user fee rate analysis. We appreciate your time. Have a great day.